So my name's Emily. I've come up to Manchester from Bournemouth, down on the sunny south coast. Well, it's a little bit sunnier than here maybe. And it's really good to be here. I've been to Manchester only twice before. I came at Christmas for the carol service that the Christian Union did. I don't know if any of you were there. And the last time I came, before that, I actually came to see if I wanted to go to uni here about 5 or 6 years ago. I was going to study anthropology, and in the end I went somewhere else. So, yeah, probably the worst decision of my life, I'm sure. But it's good to be back, and good memories of walking around Manchester. So, as you know, the Christian Union this week is putting on these series of events and talks trying to answer some of the biggest questions and objections that students have about Christianity. And I think this one is a really interesting one. Isn't Christianity just a psychological crutch for the weak? When I was at university, you know how you have those deep conversations late at night, kind of 2 in the morning, that's when you really get into the serious stuff. And I was sat with a friend in my house, and I just said to her, look, I've never asked you this before, but why is it that you don't believe in God? Because obviously she knew I did, and I knew she didn't, and I never really asked her. And she said to me, well, Emily, I just don't need him. I'm happy, my life is good, I have friends, I have interests, I'm getting an education, I just don't need him. And I think this is quite a common attitude, a common answer to the question of God and does he exist or not. I could have said to her, you know, that's not a logical answer because whether you need him or not doesn't really answer the question. But I think it kind of displays the underlying assumption that God is a psychological illusion for us, something that helps us. And whether he's really there or not, that's not really the question, maybe. Maybe you might think the same thing too, that God is a way for people to feel better about life. He's a comfort in hard times, helps you get through suffering. It's a kind of a hope to hold on to. Maybe he's for people who are weak emotionally, financially, physically, intellectually. Sometimes it can seem like God is for children and pensioners. It definitely seems like that when I go to the church in my village back home. There's this huge age gap. There's the children there, and there's the old people there. But where are the young people? Maybe they just don't need him. Another student has said to me recently, well, we're just growing out of it, aren't we? We're growing out of faith. It was helpful maybe in our evolutionary past, when people didn't understand things. It helped people deal with the fear of death, the fear of the unknown. It kind of filled in the gaps of it when we couldn't explain things. But we're growing out of it. You might hear thoughts like that in the works of people like Richard Dawkins, or New Atheists. It's a common argument that faith in God is now redundant because of advances in science, that we're more rational now than we used to be. So what can we say? Is it just a way to cope? Like my friend said, it's a way for weak people to deal with life. These are good questions. I think they're questions that everybody should ask, including Christians, to ask what your faith is based on. But I think that there's an assumption underlying this question. This assumption is kind of that the Christian view that God exists is based on desire. It's a subjective one. Christians are just responding to psychological factors, to their emotions. Whereas the atheist view, on the other hand, has nothing to do with desire or emotion. It's completely neutral and objective. It's not influenced by psychological factors. Actually, I really want to challenge this. I want to challenge that assumption. How did you come to believe what you do about God? Claiming that Christians believe because they want it to be true as easily be applied to everyone else. You could say that atheists don't believe because they don't want it to be true, along the same logic. It kind of cuts both ways, this argument. And using this argument logically, you have to say that the desire for God not to be there and not to be real could influence your perception of truth just as much as for someone who does believe he's there and does believe he's real. There's an interesting quote by a guy called Thomas Nagel. He's an American philosopher, an atheist. And he wrote this in a moment of honesty. He said, "I want atheism to be true. And I'm made uneasy by the fact that some of the most intelligent and well-informed people I know are religious believers. It isn't just that I don't believe in God and naturally hope that I'm right in my belief. It's that I hope there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that." There may be many reasons why he feels like that, or why many people feel like that. Maybe their image of God is really negative. Maybe they can't imagine changing their minds. Maybe they don't want to be held morally accountable or to lose control. Now, I'm not saying that everyone who doesn't believe they do so because they don't want to. I've also had friends say to me, you know, I do actually want there to be God, but nobody's given me good enough reasons to think it's true, and I just need to know more. If you're in that position, this is a really good week for you, because to see you very openly giving you the opportunity to ask those difficult questions and to find answers to them. But it's also interesting to think about why people might desire God, why people do have a need for him, why they do have a sense that he's there. Some people would actually argue that our desire for God is a positive signpost towards God, rather than a negative. That there's an intuition or an innate sense in humanity that there's more than the material, that there is a supernatural or a spiritual reality. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, popularity of belief makes it true, but when you could go to any culture or society throughout history, and in nearly all of them find some belief in something more than the material, that's going to raise big questions. C.S. Lewis, he was an Oxford scholar and an author. You might know him from the Narnia books. And he made a really interesting point. He said that every human has natural desires that we're born with. So, for example, we have a desire for food, we get hungry, desire for water, desire for sex. And things exist to fulfill those desires. They can be satisfied. Not saying that they always will be and you'll always get what you want, but there does exist such a thing as food, as water, as sex. And he said it does seem that in humans there is a natural desire for God. And he asked the question, is that then the only desire out of all our natural human desires for which such a thing doesn't exist? And I'd also like to point out that imagine for a moment, if God did create us, if he is real, if he is loving as Christians claim he is, then it's not surprising at all that we should have some sense of him, some intuition that he's there, a desire to know him, and a capacity to relate to him in some way. The Bible claims just this, that God designed us for a relationship with him and to know him, and that he designed us to have that ability and that desire. It says that he's revealed himself to us through nature, through our wonder at creation, through our conscience and sense of morality, and ultimately through Jesus Christ, born as a person, as a human being. And if this is true, then it's not at all surprising, and I actually think it would be really inconsistent if God didn't meet our needs, if having a relationship with him didn't in some way fulfill our deepest needs and have a huge implication on our lives. The Bible actually uniquely, out of all religions, describes God as a personal, eternal, loving Father. And I just think if that is true, then it makes sense that trusting him would be about dependence and about his strength in our weakness. And it's been the story of thousands of people throughout history that deciding to follow Jesus has made a huge impact on their lives, has enabled them to face suffering, has removed the fear of death, and has given them hope and joy. And I'm not surprised if God is who he says he is. But having said this, I'm not asking you to believe in God simply based on other people's experience or on a gut feeling. And the Bible doesn't either. It has a higher standard of truth than that. Clearly things don't exist just because we desire them to, but it doesn't follow that just because we desire something, it doesn't exist. And I would argue that the Bible gives us good reasons to believe that God does exist, and good reasons that we can search out and investigate to find out that it's true. It contains historical accounts of the life of Jesus, his death and his resurrection. They're open to be read, to be investigated, to be questioned. And many Christians have come to believe in God not because they really, really wanted it to be true, but because they found it was so. C.S. Lewis, who I mentioned earlier, was an atheist into his adult life, and he had many Christian friends, and they used to have discussions and debates about God and faith. And he really didn't want it to be true. He resisted it for a long time. But eventually, he came to the conviction that actually Jesus was who he said he was, that this was real, and he felt compelled that he had to accept it. But when he did, he writes of his conversion that he was the most reluctant convert in all of England. His conversion was intellectual before it was emotional, although that's important. I was also talking to a girl in Exeter recently, and she was saying, he became a Christian a year ago, but I feel like I don't have a good story of how it happened, because it wasn't dramatic, because I wasn't in the pits of despair, and I wasn't like, a drug addict and on the brink of death, and then God found me and there was a blinding light. She said I was quite happy with my life. Everything was fine. But I met some Christians who told me about Jesus. I investigated it, and I found that it was both true and good. And so I became a Christian. It's interesting to ask people, I call it a funny question to ask people, why don't you believe in God? And to hear the answers that come back. And in fact, most of the answers I get are not people saying, I've investigated Jesus, I've looked at the historical evidence, and I'm just not convinced. Most people, it seems, have a moral objection to God. Their image of God is somebody who's distant, who's uncaring in the face of their suffering. The idea of God as a kind of dictator in the sky, like a Hitler in the heavens. And so often people's descriptions of God just make me say, I don't believe in that God either. That's not the God I believe in at all. The God of the Bible, shown most clearly in Jesus, is completely different to what you might expect. He's not a distant, impersonal being who wields authority like a dictator. God showed us what he was like by becoming human, personal. He experienced suffering the full extent of human life. You might not seem very godlike when you read about him. He had all authority and power, but it wasn't demonstrated in a military power or political ways. And in fact, the Bible says his moment of greatest power and victory was his moment of greatest weakness in death on the cross. When what to the world looked like a disaster, was in fact a triumph. If this sounds bizarre, I think it's because it wasn't a human plan. Jesus doesn't look like a hero when he's naked and bloody, being killed on a cross. Many people even find the idea offensive or ridiculous that God would die. So God's plan just makes me think, what human would invent this story? Where's the strength? Where's the power? Where's the dominance of Jesus? He seems such an unlikely saviour. But my challenge to you is to believe it, not because you find it unlikely or difficult to believe, but if it's true. And to believe it not because you find this deep desire in you, although you may have that, but to look at it and decide for yourself, could this possibly be true? This week is a great week for questions. The Christian Union just want to open it up and say, come and ask your hardest questions. There's no demand of close your eyes and just believe, have blind faith, but rather come and investigate. Let's talk, let's dig into the evidence and look at it. So I want to challenge you to do that this week. There's lots of ways you can do that. You can come back to your talks, and they're going to be happening every lunchtime and in the evenings. You can take away this book that's on your chairs or on your tables. This is an account of Jesus' life. It's written by a doctor called Luke, who investigated the eyewitness accounts of Jesus' life and put them together. You can also find out more when this week is done. You might notice that, I think they're in books actually, if you just pick them up, there are these little sheets. These are feedback forms. We'd love to know whatever event you come to this week, what you thought, your comments, your questions, your reflections. But also, if you're intrigued and you want to find out more, and you'd like to read through an account of Jesus' life with the Christian Union and discuss that and ask those questions, you can tick the box that says tell me more, put your name and your number, and they'll tell you when those things are happening. You're not signing your life away by taking it. They'll just give you some information. I hope you've been texting in questions. I think we're going to go to questions in a minute. Yeah.
Please continue to send questions or anything in the touch this finish, so even when we're talking, do that. We'll have comments with the present. First question was, atheism is more popular in more advanced societies, so isn't it logical to think that one day we will need God?
So by advanced, I'm guessing you mean kind of scientifically, technologically advanced. It's interesting actually that the church does seem to be growing fastest in Africa, in Asia. Most interestingly, the church is growing really rapidly in Iran and Afghanistan. What a surprise. So it can lead people to think, well, when there's science, faith is dropping off. And in other places where they're catching up, that actually faith isn't so, oh, there's more faith in God. I think this is a rather simplistic view, first of all. But also, I think you can look at that and say that science is kind of taking away faith in God. But when you look at the increase of church numbers and decrease of church numbers, which I guess maybe is a major comment, is where your comment has come from, it's often a kind of institutionalized traditional church that's declining in the West. And it's a very orthodox, conservative kind of faith that's increasing, faith based on the Bible and on the person of Jesus Christ. And I think that's quite interesting, that there is an increase of people finding faith through looking at Jesus and through looking at the Bible, rather than through their background go to Sunday school anymore and aren't given a religious education. But I don't think that means that there aren't people who are discovering that it's true in other ways. There's so much you could say about that, but I think also there's different ways of coming to knowledge, and I think that science is the dominant one at the moment in the West. But when you look at Christianity, it has a very strong basis in historical evidence, which maybe we doubt quite a lot now because we're quite a postmodern society, and we're kind of questioning text and questioning lots of these historical accounts that we have. But I still think that it's possible to find truth in historical accounts. And there are things that you will believe that you only would know through history. So science isn't the only way to come to a knowledge of what's true.
And is there anyone who wants to respond?
And there's the research in developed countries, the largest demographic is growing later. In developing countries, religion is still growing. But it's rapidly growing. And they found another correlation. The IQ correlates with atheism.
I haven't heard about IQ correlating with atheism. That's pretty interesting. It might be so. I think our cultural trend in the West at the moment is atheism. And since the Enlightenment, kind of scientific thinking and that rational mindset has dominated. But I don't think you can look at a cultural trend and completely take what's true from that. I think that we tend to think that in the West we're ahead in basically every way, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. And I think maybe it's our ways of thinking have changed here. And so maybe we use more the rational side of our brains, but I don't think it means that the kind of non-rational side of us, our intuition and other senses we have, aren't just as important. Yeah.
So the way I see it, there's two sources of truth. There's evidential truth, which is scientific evidence, and there's testimonial truth, which is my personal experience. That's another source of truth. The way I see it is science is purely based in evidential truth, and disregards testimonial truth. And religion is based in testimonial truth, and to some extent disregards evidential truth. John. So my question is, in today's world, science has made many advancements and that's based in evidential truth. And the method of reason of believing something based in testimonial truth is the same reason that terrorists use. And there are many justifications for all sorts of things that can be made from testimonial truth. So my question is, why would you find your belief in something which can be which can directly lead in certain circumstances to negative consequences?
Of course it can be manipulated, and it could, there are any kind of way that you use to find truth you can manipulate, but I don't necessarily think that means that it's not a valid way of discovering something. I'd also argue that in the same way there are things that can be justified through the kind of scientific route that might not be very beneficial for society. If you take the logical conclusion of naturalism and atheism, then the sanctity of human life is just a value that we've dreamed up. Well, it's because you want there to be, you think that human life is precious, but logically from a completely naturalistic, scientific point of view, that can't be inferred. So I'd say that either way, you could manipulate it and use it for bad, but I don't think that takes away from the value of discovering the truth by another method.
But I mean, where they overlap, so where they're trying to answer the same questions about the universe and things, in those circumstances, between the two, where they can show that testimonial truth is fireball across the sky, and as we've evolved, it's deeper understandings of things. The God of the gaps. God fits into the gaps that we can't explain yet, but it's shrinking because we can explain more and more. So I mean, how do you base your belief, your testimonial, where it fits with it?
This is going to have to be the last question, sorry, but come and ask questions afterwards and keep chatting. So I would say don't believe in the God of the gaps, and believe in a God who's over it all. And just because we find out more of how things work, it doesn't take away the question of why things are. And I think that God doesn't conflict with our understanding of the complexity of the world and the mechanics and how it all works. I think he's over all that. But let's talk more afterwards. I know some of you have to go to lectures.
There's one more question I have. Well, it's not serious, but if there's anyone who wants to admit to it, they wrote, I desire the perfect wife. Does she exist? If anyone wants to come up and take a note of that, we could try some speed dating. Okay. All that's left for me to do is thank Emily and to tell you guys to stay for the second talk. There's going to be another one that we're going to have. It's going to start in about 25 minutes or so. It's 1:10, and it's going to be posing the question, how can God be relevant to me? So that'll go on until around 2. And then tonight, there's going to be a similar event at the Source Cafe at OP. They're going to be looking at identity and what am I worth, and reading us the Bible. And it starts at 7:30. It's going to be like music, drama, cake, drinks, all that stuff. And then feedback forms. In the feedback forms, there is a box just at the back. So as you're leaving or if you're staying, drop the form off, sit down, leave, understand people got to the lectures. And then books. All the books at the back. If you're a guest here, are a pound. If you're a member of the CU, then they're going to be at their home. Sorry, guys. So yeah, all that's left for me to say. Thank you, and good afternoon.